everyone for being here. And I'm Eric Stokin, Director of the Center for Social Science Scholarship. We at CS are very glad to be hosting this book writing workshop with our resident expert, Dr. John Rennie Short, Professor Emeritus from UMBC School of Public Policy. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I wanted to just note a couple upcoming events that might be appealing to you. At 5:30 p.m. on February 18th, following the Jelani Cobb event, we're going to host a celebration of social science faculty publications in the Skylight Room. So we'll feature those who have published books in the last couple of years and or high impact articles. So we hope you'll be able to join us. Yesterday, we were slated to actually host the COST New Faculty Micro Talks in the Library Gallery, but given the snow, we have rescheduled the event for April 2nd. So this event will feature lightning talks from our new faculty members across the college, and we'll share out details. You can actually find all the details for these events and more at socialscience.umbc.edu. We're also on LinkedIn, Facebook, X, Instagram at UMBC SOC SCI. And we post most of our stuff on my UMBC group. So you can find center news and events. And we have a podcast called Retrieving the Social Sciences. So that features scholarly engagements on Spotify, Apple, and Amazon Music. Thank you again for being here, and let me take the time to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. John Rennie Short. Dr. Short is an expert on urban issues, environmental concerns, geopolitics, and the history of cartography. He has studied cities around the world and lectured to a variety of audiences. I actually won't have the time to list all of his books because there's more than 60. And we only have an hour. So given the breadth of his experience, let me just highlight a couple of his recent works, which include books with the following titles: Hedging and Conflict in the South China Sea, Demography and the Making of the Modern World, Insurrection, Human Geography, The Urban Now, Hosting the Olympic Games, The Real Cost for Cities, The Unequal City, and many, many more. Before coming to UMBC in 2002, he was a professor in the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University. And from 1978 to 1990, he taught at the University of Reading in the UK. He has held visiting appointments as Senior Research Fellow at the Australian National University, as the Erasmus Professor at, and I might be mispronouncing this, Groningen University, and as the Leverhulme Professor at Loughborough University. Among his research awards are a Fulbright Asian Fellowship, the Visitor Fellowship at Yale University, the Dibner Fellowship at the Smithsonian, the Kono Fellowship at the Huntington Library, and the Andrew Mellon Fellowship at the American Philosophical Society. His work has been translated into many languages, including Arabic, Chinese, Czech, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Persian, Portuguese, Romanian, Spanish, Turkish, and Vietnamese. So we are extremely lucky to have you here at UMBC and to have you here today to give us the secret sauce of book publishing. With that, I'll now turn it over to you, Dr. Short. Thank you.
Eric, thank you for that very generous introduction. I want to thank both Eric and Amy for organizing this. I would start off by saying I'm the worst person you should have for a talk like this, because I write lots of books. It's never easy. And so I think my position is obviously kind of biased because I have written so many, but what I want to do is just to cover three main themes and leave lots of time for questions or comments from you. I think that's, you probably have more direct, specific questions, which I may not answer in my very brief survey. So I want to think about, first off, is the notion of imagining the book. Writing a book is not for the faint-hearted. And I think to make it easier, I think one thing is to have what's the driving idea for you, at least, behind writing a book. And if you don't have one, or I'd seriously caution you not to write a book. There's lots of social science disciplines where book writing is not de rigueur. History, probably is. But for many of the social sciences at UMBC, economics, probably public policy, a few more, books are not the main currency. Often articles are. So think carefully. I mean, it's hard going. It's a big project. It will take up months and years of your time. So think seriously why you're doing it, what you want to get out of it. Will it achieve certain goals for you, apart from just writing the book? I am the last person you should ask, because it's obviously a sort of anal compulsive drive for me to write books. And very few people have that, I think. And so for many people, it's hard work. For me as well, but I think I'm used to it by now. So I think the thing would be, have a clear idea of why you want to write a book. I'd never counsel anyone to turn their PhD into a book. I think that's a mistake for a couple of reasons, and I can come back to that if you want. I never published my PhD as a book. I think it was 5 articles. And if you want to join the academy, sometimes, or you want to move up, the hierarchy, often articles are the way to go. So think very carefully about writing a book. You really need to want to be able to do it. And the thing that would keep you going would having a simple idea behind it. So for example, I'll give you an example from my latest one, hedging and conflict in the South China Sea. There's a lot of stuff about the South China Sea, US and China, 2 competing superpowers, one ascending, one perhaps declining. And so my basic idea was to find, okay, what's that context, but what's the role and position of the other countries that are set around the South China Sea, in particular Vietnam, Malaysia and the Philippines. So that was the basic kind of simple idea. And sometimes I think you need a simple, almost like your 2-minute elevator speech, because that kind of sustain you, because a book can take you in all kinds of directions as a big heavy load. And every now and again, I think you need to go, okay, why am I writing this again? What's the main theme? You can easily, the expression is you can go native, right? You can just get so lost in the references and the literature review or whatever. You can sometimes lose the plot. What is the plot for your book? So I think it's imagining the book is an important early part. The writing of the book is really hard, everyday graft, I think. And the way to cope with that, or at least one of the ways I found it, is to break it down clearly into working on a chapter for a couple of months and then leaving it. To keep sustained effort on one book, the whole of it all at the one time, is quite difficult to do, and we'll have other things to do. So I would concentrate, I think, I'd advise people to concentrate on a specific chapter, work hard on that, and then leave it for a while. The other thing I'd counsel people to do is to get as much feedback about your writing and your presentation of your ideas. A book can be a big project, but if you're working on it just on its own as one complete piece, that's very heavy conceptual load to carry. And you can, in your own mind, we always have brilliant ideas in our own mind, but the real test is, will they stand up to the light of day? So I'd look for every opportunity to present the ideas in your book in different platforms rather than the final book itself. I've often used I was fortunate in public policy, for example, graduate classes in the main. So I would often use ideas that I was thinking about in my classes, give them a run through. I taught an entire course for 6 years on demography, which was then turned into a book. But that giving you, there's no more harsher group of critics than graduate students. You can fool yourself in your arguments and your narrative, but presenting it to the cold light of day on a regular basis is good, I think. So find as many opportunities for you to express your ideas that you're using in the book, or the arguments that you're using. Use as many opportunities as you can. Lectures, if you get invited to give a seminar, going to conferences. So it's not, often people have the notion of like you're doing your work and then you're writing. The writing of the book is somehow separate. For me, it's always an integral part of my teaching and my public lectures or even my reading. So I think integrate it into your entire work. If you leave writing the book, just simply writing the book, Tuesday afternoons when you have that's a hard way to go. It's probably easier for fiction writers, I think, but for us non-fiction people, we need as many opportunities to have a go at this idea of this book and to get as much feedback as possible. Find some good friends. That downside of having good friends to look at your work, they will ask you to look at their work. But here's a sort of little known fact. Everyone, to my mind, was always a fantastic editor. Everyone is great at editing amongst your academic colleagues. They just can, and the bit that you thought you had argued clearly, they can, what does this mean or whatever. So I would use my colleagues and knowing that there's a reciprocal relationship. I was always a bit hesitant to do that too much because there's a certain, not ownership, but a certain, sort of reluctance to share your kind of work too soon. But find a buddy or a series of buddies and do the same for them. And a certain honesty in the early stage is often very useful, I think. You can just save yourself a lot of grief from reviewers later. And it's such a big project that you can live inside of your head for long periods of time. And so what I think you need to do, I'd need to do anyway, is to just, let this big idea, this big book, see the light of day in a variety of forms. And that kind of helps to improve it. The other things I think I said, like you can work constantly in one chapter and then leave it for a while. I think I never work at the weekends. I never work after 5 p.m. in the evening. And what I find is often it's as useful to know when to stop as it is when to write, just when to start. Often people will see it as I have to work on the book, and so they'll sit over the computer, nothing's going very well. And you can sort of, it's just not only hard work, it's kind of demoralizing if nothing's coming. So I think one of the things, go for a walk, have a stop, have a week off from the writing of the book, do something else. And sometimes a book can be a project when you can do lots of other things reaching your goal. And that didn't include checking the references again, seeing what else is out there, all part of it. So a sense of like being involved in the writing of the book, but without necessarily always spending your time on writing, especially if it's not happening. Especially if it's really, really, really hard work, maybe you just need a break from it. And I've often found that my best writing, for me at least, is on Mondays. I always hated teaching on a Monday because it felt like that was my writing time. And I think it's because I never did any work on it over the weekend. Went to the movies or played golf or bicycling or something. And you could come back on the Monday. I always felt refreshed. And then it was a time kind of decay. By the time Friday came along, that was it. I was beat. I was gone from that. So often finding that, devoting yourself to the writing, seriously, conscientiously, but also stepping back from it. And one way to do that is to find a time and a space that works for you. So, for example, I work best first thing in the morning. So almost all my writing is from 7:30 till 11:30, 3 days a week. I think and so I know those are my writing times, and I'm most productive. And then I don't need to force the issue in the afternoon. I can do something else, or when I was teaching or whatever. So find the time that's works for you. Some people, for example, my wife doesn't. She's at like 5 till 8 p.m. in the evening. So she loves it when I go travel the world, because then she can then have her dining that's associated with the writing rather than mine. So find the time and the space that works for you, and maximize that and cherish that. Try to make it sacrosanct, but don't continually having to go to the desk, continually to finish the book, right? That can be very kind of soul destroying in a sense. The other thing is you also have to, it can be difficult to finish a book. It was, I think, the French intellectual Paul Valéry that said, books are never finished, they're abandoned. And to some extent, you need to know when to go. There's always one more reference. I mean, I had one of the books I did was on the National Atlas, a curious history cartography thing. And I did all my research in the Library of Congress. The map library is one of the world's best. And the issue, if you do archival work in particular, there's always another archive. There's always another this, there's always another that, there's always another reference you should check up. And sometimes it's difficult to get that completion because it becomes such a big project. It becomes part of your life. Leaving it, finishing it has a sort of bad for your psychotherapy in many ways, right? And so in that sense, I'm not quite sure how to get round that. In my case, COVID was bad for me because I could spend so much time on the archival research and never needed, and then but then after COVID and I could get back into the library again, I think I said to myself, like, looking at 70 atlases produced in the 20th century, that's enough. You know, there was maybe 500, but 70 was good enough. And so sometimes you almost have to call a halt. That's one reason I think why I became a serial publisher. It avoided that separation loss because I would already be starting another one before finishing. If you have just one big book in mind and that's all you've kind of got, that's tough to finish. And I've known so many of my colleagues from early graduate years who had a kind of big book in them, but it became like the Moby Dick. It became the great white whale that they could never finish. It was never, you could never, it became so important. There's always, you wanted to make sure it was absolutely right. I'm not arguing for sloppy scholarship, but I think there comes a time when you have to say enough's enough. So I think so the third thing I was going to look at was just, so you've imagined the book, you've written the book, and now there's the publishing of the book. A couple of things that suggest pieces of advice: do not self-publish. It's a no-no, I think, in the academic world. I always remember there was there was a guy who. Someone said, "Oh, you must have written more books than anyone else at UMBC." And I said, "No, there was a poet. I think he was dean for a while, and he had like 90 odd books, all from the same publisher who never published many other books. And actually, he's a good poet, but it undermined his." For anyone outside of UMBC, where he was idolized for being a nice guy, but outside of UMBC, it was never taken seriously because it wasn't like a serious publisher. So I think that's very important. Do not self-publish. Be very wary of predatory publishers, and they come in a number of forms. The most obvious one is when someone will be looking for you to pay to get published. Now, you can go on the internet and find all kinds of lists of predatory publishers. And some of them are maybe not, but be careful of that. So it used to be that they would ask for the authors to pay. And another twist on the predatory publishing was you would get to publish for free, but they would charge so much for the books. And they charged so much for the books because it was only going to libraries. And libraries then began to kind of realize that, they were the money that the predatory publishers were making were from the libraries, not from the authors. So be very wary of that. Due diligence with the publishers. There's always the choice of which publisher, and I just look at the spectrum. Big name publishers, non-fiction publishers, will always will not accept your submission. And the reason for that is they go through agents. And I'm not sure, I've never used an agent. I'd thought about it for a while, but I thought I could be my own best, at best sort of ally in a sense. And I didn't think I was going to publish enough books that any major publisher, would be at all interested. There's very few academic writers who have that power. So I think I would avoid an agent at this stage unless it's your cousin. So useful. Some people have that. And the bigger the publisher, generally people are swayed by the reputation. But the bigger the reputation, the smaller they will allocate effort and time and money to your particular book. So I think the thing to do would be whatever the subject of your book is, find out which presses have published in that. Small, especially new upstart publishers with innovative means of making money, more going to ebooks or whatever. So don't be wary of small time recent publishers if they're genuine, because often they're keen to make a name for themselves and they have a smaller stable of writers. So I've had a variety of publishers. My main one has been British-based ones, Routledge. I've done some with Oxford University Press, a whole variety. The bigger publishers tend to allocate more resources to the actual production, but not much to the advertising. So depends why you want to write the book. You want fame and fortune. You want your name out there. You don't want to write a book and then it just kind of sits there. And so I'd look at the resources that they have. As I say, a very big publisher, you're just one small author, they're hardly going to spend much time on you. The advantages of the big choice for academics is university presses. And again, they come in a variety of forms and generally do a very good production job, are very careful with the production, the copy editing and so forth. Sometimes they don't spend all that much on the advertising or promotion, and generally it's up to the author. But that is something that's apparent across the spectrum of publishers. I think my first book came out in 1980, and at that time you submitted the manuscript and the publisher did all the work, and that was it. Now because of the economics of publishing, publishers have offloaded a lot of the things that they used to do onto you, the author. Copy editing is often quite kind of fairly derisory in some things, and you have to do that carefully. Doing the index, which always drives me crazy. So whenever they give the offer, do you want to do the index yourself or pay for it? And being Scottish Presbyterian, I'm never keen on paying for it, but I just hate giving that, spending that amount of time on the index. I just find that something soul destroying. But so all of those things are now offloaded onto you. Often, for example, you finish the book and you think, oh, that's it. No, in many cases, the work has just begun. They'll ask you to write all the kind of blurbs in order to publish it in the ebook form. Each chapter will need a kind of summary. And by this stage, you are thoroughly exhausted with the book. Your love affair with the book is all over, long and gone. And now they keep pulling you back in, right? So there's a trailing effect of being an academic author that people aren't aware of, and I'm acutely aware of. I seem to spend all my time I spend 10% writing and then 90% doing indexes or summaries or press releases or something. It just can become, so be aware of that. The initial point of entry is generally every now and again, someone might email you out of the blue and say, oh, Eric or Pamela, we've loved your work. We'd love to publish it as a book. I check first if it's like the Nigerian lottery, congratulations, Eric and Pamela. You've won the publishing award thing, right? So beware of, sometimes it can happen, but generally it's you writing to a publisher. And what I would do, it's like I used to tell my graduate students when you're applying for a job, or my undergraduates, if they're going to graduate school, be very specific about the letter. Um, you want to publish this book with this publisher because of the following reasons. You've just had a series, or you have a series on this, and my book will be, add to this, mention a specific editor who's published this, be as specific as possible. The usual one, I've written this book and I'd love you to publish it. Could you just send me the contract? And they're inundated. And so they're looking for someone who's actually done their homework a bit. Why do you want to publish with Slippery Rock University Press? Well, because, they have this series. I think it's a big part of the series. And, I've really enjoyed, I've really seen the reviews, whatever. In other words, you're buttering them up. It's like you're applying for a job. And remember, they need to publish books, but they have a problem of oversupply of proposals. So you want to catch their eye, that you're not just like desperate to get published by anyone and this is a standard letter. Very much tailor your proposal letter. And then most publishers, I think it's a good idea to email someone in particular, rather than the standard proposal email inbox, which you will have to do anyway, but it's just useful to make that point of contact. And then they will say, here's a proposal form, and look at the proposal form very specifically. Each publisher, there's a template. They will ask you, how many, what's the word length, what's the main theme, what's the chapter breakdown, send us a sample chapter, all of the, how many figures, when will it be ready, and be as truthful as honest. I mean, they always imagine that you're lying somewhat when you say, within the next year. So try to be as specific as possible. And one giveaway, which they look for from academic authors, which is the kiss of death for your proposal. If you say, I'll be interested to the general reader, no, it won't. That's their, no, it won't. We all have delusions of grandeur or fantasies that everyone in America wants to hear about the rise of the national atlas in the 20th century. Why wouldn't they be interested in that? I was fascinated by that, but obviously the great American public weren't. So be specific. Who's the market? Do not say it will also appeal to the general reader. That when I had my own book, 3-book series. Whenever I read that, I used to put it. That's it. That's all over. And they're looking for ways to reject. Right? You get so many proposals. They're looking for easy ways. So make it very difficult for them to reject your proposal with either it's going to appeal to the general public. No, it's not. It's going to appeal to people in the history of cartography. Be as honest as possible. Then they send it out. If you're lucky, they will send it out. And then this is one part of what has been referred to as the idea of surviving the punishment. It's the same when you write academic papers, right? There's no one, I don't think anyone's crueler than academic reviewers, either for journal articles, because anonymity gives them ability to be complete assholes, really, I think. And it's the same with anonymous book review editors. And they know who you are, but you don't know who they are. Now, as time went on, I've had an easier and easier time, because I have a certain reputation, right? But even then, I think earlier on in my career, it was harder going. It's equivalent of like, I remember first time going to an academic conference, I was introduced to someone and they shook my hand, and all the time they were looking at someone else, right? And I remember that event, and it was that sense of critics can be particularly cruel to new authors, I think, or authors with only 1 or 2 books. They can be sometimes it can be very, very good, and sometimes they can be kind of lazy. And the worst thing for many authors is the harshness of criticism. This book has been, you've been working on it, or in the proposal, and someone's come back with a harsh criticism. There's a couple of ways to respond, but one is the publishers see this all the time. So they're basically, so if they say, could you just give your comments to the criticism? They say this all the time. So what they're looking for is for you to, how you negotiate that. You don't necessarily have to accept the criticism, but it's a kind of, it's showing them your maturity and ability to handle that. So if someone says this, I'm glad that I'm glad that reviewer A, it's always reviewer A, B, or C. I'm glad that reviewer A took the time to read the book, the proposal. I took on board their comments that they disliked my arguments. But in the final book, I'll be sure to make this crystal clear. Something along those lines, So they're looking there. Be very careful with how you respond, because your first reaction, I do not do well with criticism. And so my wife says you cannot email back within, you have to wait a week, because your first response is to be kind of explosive. Other people's response is to withdraw, So I think somewhere in between that you've read the criticism, but you can handle it and you can move on from that. So they're very careful with that responses to criticisms. I'm trying to think what else I would say about the publishers. It's a tough world out there now because of so for example, I had done some books with OUP, and then they said, it was time for another edition. And they said, yeah, we're not going to do another edition. We're not going to do any more books in this field entirely. And the field was, I think, international political economy, which is not like it's not like the National Atlas, the history of the National Atlas. It's quite a big area. And they're just hard pushed to kind of cut costs. And so we're in a very competitive environment. And they're asking you to do more, do more indexing, copy editing, and also offloading costs. One of the things for many people in the social science and also in the humanities is they're also looking for subvention. And I would have to say that UMBC is very generous in that sense. Excuse me, going back to my Atlas book, which you needed illustrations for it, and they needed to be in color. But I managed to get money from actually the Center for Social Science, the Humanities, the Dean's Office. Nancy Miller was my chair. She came up with some money. There are lots of little pools of money at UMBC available for people looking for either, some summer stipend to help with the writing or some subvention money. There's a lot of little pools of money, but they can add up. I think I got 4 sources to get from UMBC just to get the color illustrations, and it just really makes the book. It would have been silly without it. So look at UMBC as well as a kind of resource for actual, money for writing over the summer, or for getting some research assistance. So publishers are offloading. UMBC is remarkably generous, and I think especially to younger, newer faculty wanting to write a book. And then that kind of neatly comes back to my kind of, I think, an original point is, make sure you want to write this book for a good reason. The good reason can be, pure ego, nothing wrong with that. But it's a hard kind of, it's the Jerry Seinfeld thing. It's like trying to move overturn a jukebox, right? It's a lot of effort involved in this. Really make sure if it's for many academic papers is fine and good. So really, it's a long haul project that you want to come out of feeling kind of good about it and yourself. If it's so long term and tedious, you'd have to think about the costs and benefits. So I think what I'll do is there must be lots of questions or things that people have, and it's probably best if I kind of open the floor for any comments or questions, and I'm more than happy to answer.
Looks like Pam has her hand, and then Irina.
Yeah, John, I would like to thank you for your wonderful presentation. I don't have questions, but I wish I had heard this when I was younger in my career. It's really helpful what you said, and all stages we do go through them. Thank you very much.
Hi. Yes, John, I too found it very, very helpful. My question is in terms of pursuing a book contract with a proposal versus having something already written, and that that decision between writing a piece of work as a book versus a series of articles, say. So do you have thoughts on pursuing the contract with a proposal versus an actual manuscript fully written?
Sure, yeah. Someone said to me, what comes first, what the idea? And I always say, oh, the contract. You have an idea for the book, you kind of work it out. You maybe have a sort of roughish idea. So, for example, for the book on the South China Sea issue, I knew the basic idea, what I wanted. I knew I could write one chapter relatively easy, which was the rise of China and its role in it. But I didn't, I didn't know much. I didn't have a great deal of knowledge about the rest. But I thought, I'm going to find out about that. So what I did was I kind of went after to get the contract, because what the contract does is to solidify, make it easier for you to carry on and write the book. I think the worst thing anyone could do would be to think, I'm going to write the book and then get the contract. Because then what happens if it doesn't come through? You're left with a 300-page manuscript that you then maybe could break down. But that's a long, harrowing procedure. Often they will ask for a one chapter, generally. So you should have one chapter if you want to go for the contract one. But the contract, so if you had put the contract in block capital letters and the final manuscript smaller, so I'd go for the contract first. But you should have that's why I think at the beginning I said the notion of imagining the book. You should work out, what the chapters are going to be like, even if you haven't written them yet. And they may change in shape, form. And that actually that's a kind of really nice thing about writing a book, I think. From you thought you were going to, the chapter took on a different meaning once you actually started writing it compared to the other ones. So I'll give you an example. I wasn't aware of the whole theory of what they call hedging in international relations for small countries. And so one of the reviewers for the proposal had said, oh, he needs to say something more about hedging. And I thought, oh, yeah, that's right, I do. So in other words, between the contract and the proposal, it's a kind of ongoing organic thing. So I would not write the entire book out. I would have a good idea of it, be able to write, chapter outlines, be able to write one full chapter at least before going ahead. That would be my advice. And the other question, Pam, yeah, actually there was two, if I remember. What was the other one?
Well, I thought that that process, whether you wrote it out as a full manuscript or as a chapter outline for the proposal. If
Sure,
that,
no, I'd always kind of, I have one good chapter, I think, in mind. They want that, and that'd be your best idea. But yeah, and I think most publishers are kind of aware of that. The only people who come with a full manuscript are PhDs, PhD, and publishers are very, very wary of that now. I think they always were. I've been involved in 3 academic book series, and I don't think we've published a PhD, because a PhD is, it's its own, kabuki theater, ritualistic kind of thing. It doesn't go well into a book. And there's something about the book, a kind of creative thing. If you're writing, as you're writing it up, other things come. For me, that's the great joy of writing books. I think every night, I write articles, but that's like 100 meters dash. I'll mix my metaphors. 100 meters dash, and it's also a kabuki theater. There's the literature review. There's there's like the format you kind of go through, and it has its own kind of pleasure in doing that. But it's a kind of sugar high, I think, and that's all over. A book is a meaty. That's like a meal, bottle of wine, and a good cigar all at the one time, right? So I think I would. It has a more lasting payoff, or it did for me at least. I mean, I also like to mix it up, to be honest. I think for the writing, if you keep writing on the book, you can become stale quite quickly. So often what I'll do, I will write small op-ed pieces. So I write for the conversation, or I get asked to write an op-ed or something, and I love doing that, because especially when I'm writing a book, because it's a change of pace. All of a sudden you stop running the marathon, and then you do the high jump, and it's all over. It's all quickly, but it's great. You get an immediate response, but then you can go back to the big project. So I think writing a book becomes a part of your life, but you need to be doing other things as well, I think.
thanks.
So
I think there's there's an art to it, right? You start off with some kind of idea that kind of motivates you. So I have been doing a lot of traveling in Southeast Asia. A lot of it was my urban work, but traffic and so forth. But you were in the area, and all this stuff come out about South China Sea, and so what could you say original or new about that? So by far the best part of writing a book is when you're writing the outline for yourself. You got a piece of paper, and I'm kind of old school. I get the yellow pad out and write kind of themes. That's the best part of it of all, because then it's full of promise. It could be the greatest book ever, right? It's all ahead of you. It's all like, and we all have delusions of grandeur, I think. Otherwise, why would you do it? If you don't think it's going to be a really great book, why begin with that? So at that stage, it's all full of promise, and then you kind of think, okay, so now I have to start going through that process. Who would I publish with? What would the chapter that I send to them look like? Once you get the contract, you're about only 1/10 of the way through then, because then you have to start actually writing the book. And the chapters are interesting, but each successive thing, it becomes slightly less creative and more perspirational, right? You have to kind of check your references, or you have to go back through all of that. Was that page 54? Did I get that quote from? Should I take more careful notes? I have to go back to the archives. Then it becomes, but you have this idea of it's kind of moving forward. And the problem is, I think, that there's never an end date to it. There's always something you could be doing. And that's what I mean, a sense of like you need not an end date, some kind of timetable in your head. Otherwise, it can just expand. So I would think I'd never want to spend I always want to finish any book by the end of the calendar year. So I always reminded of great movie, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And the screenwriter forget his name offhand, but he's written a wonderful book called Adventures in the Screen Trade. It's about writing, which fascinated me. And he was asked, how long did it take you to write the screenplay? And he said, oh, 2 weeks. And they said, wow, that was quick. He said, no, I've been thinking about it for 25 years, though. So in that sense, a lot of the things that you're working on have like been, so that South China Sea thing, I think it will come out a couple of months' time. I think the first time I started thinking about it was 2016. So there's the thinking of it, and then the writing of it, and then the writing, kind of the hard part of the writing, I'll keep trying within a year. Really light service load, which my colleagues, I'm sure, will have managed to escape that a lot. But what I did do was the teaching, and I taught some undergraduate classes as well. But I tried to incorporate it all into one, or not all into one, but in the sense a lot of my teaching would be revolve around what I was thinking of. You could introduce some of your ideas in there, or your writing of a shorter piece could be, magnified in the book. So I think it was more of a ongoing kind of thing. I think the best way to describe an ongoing obsession with writing the book for an entire year. Minimum normally, but a slow fermentation over a number of years. That's what I've never been able to, out the blue, just suddenly think I'm going to write a book, start writing the book and finish it within a year. For me, it's a slow burn, but then which speeds up because you want to get it finished and you're on a roll. And now, once you have a contract, you have technically an end date, right? Because they'll say they want the final manuscript by such and such a date. Now, there's some give and take, but you can't be too much give and take. Otherwise, because generally there's a publishing schedule, right? They want one of the ways that they set their, so if you get a contract, it will say final manuscript by so-and-so. And they'll give a couple of months lever, but what they're looking for is how it's going to fit into their next year's publishing program, right? It's not just like the book comes and it's out. Generally, they want to, spring or fall brochures, for example. So the deadlines, I've always kind of kept to the deadlines pretty much. And it's quicker for your book to get, because if you fall out of deadline, you maybe fall out of a publishing schedule that the publisher have for all books, and then you're delayed a while, and then they're not going to spend as much money on publicity for you. I hope that answers your question. So the thing is, I have a long fermentation and then a kind of 1 year thing that is a form of obsessive compulsive behavior. I'm just, if I didn't write books, I'd be making, I'd be making statues of, Congress from pipe cleaners or something. It's that amount of anal retentive quality that I have. And it just so happens that it makes kind of book writing not easier, but compulsive for me. Actually, it's clear because I'm retired now. No one's giving me any extra bonuses for writing, but actually I'm writing more. My wife describes it as a disease. She said, you have a disease.
Well, I was going to interject a quick question. And I was also going to say, I'm sure they would be beautiful statues, even with those pipe cleaners, given the amount of work and effort that you put into this. First, I just want to thank you for taking the time to do this, and you've really done a nice job of outlining kind of all the key things, and I preempted a lot of the questions that I had. I was interested in trying to understand, for how frequently you actually publish books. Are you working on multiple books at a time, or do you find that your process is better, just focusing intensely on one, and then, later going to another? And then the one other question I want, go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't do it in parallel, so to speak. So my thing is there's a constant thing going on, right? So the constant thing is I have another 5 book titles in my head right now that I'm thinking about. And I'll think about those in a variety of ways. So it's a multi-layered thing, but the actual writing, the hard thing of even the proposal, the getting the contract, and the actual writing is generally one book at a time. I can take time off to do a shorter piece, and actually it's a kind of good, for writing obsessive, it's a good way to kind of balance out. So you move from like you're working on a, 85,000 word book, and it's nice to write 800 words for the conversation. It's nice, seems easy in comparison. But I do not work on two books at the one time in that way. It's generally all about one, because I think the closer you are to like the final writing, it takes almost your entire attention of book writing. You can maybe put out a vague proposal or send an email out and see, just like kind of throwing breadcrumbs out. And if you get a nibble, you think, okay, we'll keep that going for a bit. So there's often if you're like a serial book publisher, as I am, it's a constant kind of thing. You're writing in one, but you're already thinking of the next one, and you're putting stuff out, or you contacting people. So I wanted to, so for example, whether I will ever do it, I wanted to kind of begin to re-theorize issues of class. So almost all our theories of class are kind of based on national economies or national societies. You read Marx, Weber. But we live in a much more kind of global economy. What does that mean for reformulating ideas of class? Now, my ideas are just at that stage, kind of vague. So that's an idea that's just a very early ferment. I'm not doing much with it, just finishing off a book, but and there's maybe another one about the Scotland, something about Scotland, but vague kind of things. But so I think we all have the capacity. I don't think very few people would have the capacity to write, full bore writing books, 3 books at a time. I could not even imagine that. I think I'm one of the, but you still have enough time for like thinking of other ones, putting out vague feelers. Maybe from a year away, you maybe think, a good way. I used to, I don't do them so much now, but giving conference presentation, because they're like a year away, sometimes longer, and all you're asked for is like 200 words, right? Or often for the abstract. Well, you can put something in there, even if it's just, I'm going to get round to that by the time that conference comes up, right? But what I don't do is like just concentrate on one book. That's it, and then I move on to the next project. No, the projects are at different stages, and I'm like trying to braid them at different ways. I hope that makes sense to you. It makes sense when I say it, and I do my hand puppetry. It all makes perfect sense to me. I hope it makes sense to you.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. I'm thinking about this from the paper writing side, where I'm often kind of focused on different papers, but a book project seems like it's much more involved. I know we're getting close to time. I don't see any other hands, but does anyone else have a burning question? Otherwise, I have one more I could ask. Definitely want to give other people an opportunity. Yeah, Kamala.
Since I've asked one too, if someone else has one, I'm happy to wait. But my question is on, John, your efforts to publicize the book afterwards, after it's published. Sort of what kinds of things have you found beneficial to engage in terms of publicizing your book?
Sure, yeah. I think one of the things is to give a couple of things. It's not naturally, it doesn't come naturally to me to kind of toot my own horn, so to speak. And I think it's kind of British reserve and also a sort of inbuilt arrogance, I think. I've written this great book. Why don't you just see that, right? But I think you have to, in this day and age, a couple of ones you do is, I think writing the publicity blurbs for the publishers, which they ask you to do, that's a good way for you to get your basic ideas across. So when they, often you have to fill in this big form when you finish the book, and they will ask you, reviewers, journals, what's the main themes, whatever. Pay particular attention to that. work on that as much as you did on the book, because they're very busy. Very few people are individually going to read your book. They're going to take that. So you need to start writing in that sort of much more, Scottish families say, much more American way, much more sort of proud of you and your work. So that's one way. The other one is via brazen sort of, X accounts or whatever, social media accounts, or just getting it out there. After a while, you become quite, it becomes second nature. You're writing about something, you say, well, you want to find out more about this, it's my recent book or whatever. We're not, be willing to give talks as well. Sometimes I've given talks to like 2 people and the dog in a Barnes and Noble, for example. And that just comes with the thing. So the notion of I've done some book signings, which are always, as an academic author, always be very, very wary of, unless you have a very, very big family who are in hand to walk in. Otherwise, it can be a very kind of long, lonely night. So it's yeah, I think you're actually, the key one that you can influence is when you write in their publicity kind of form that they ask you to do. Spend some time and making sure that the back blurb does that. There's the other thing which I've often been faced with is they'll say to you, can you recommend some blurb writers? So the blurb is when someone, and sometimes the publishers do that themselves, but increasingly they say, oh, could you write to the people? And then it's like, then you're like a hat in hand to it's always a good friend or colleague. I hate to bother you, but could you read my book and write something great about it? Some people can do that. The problem for me is you're getting older. You have less and less kind of friends who are like able or willing or like are still compos mentis enough to write a blurb, right? And academics, in the main, find it difficult to do these things, self-promote. We're not great self-promoters. And it's something, actually, that'd be a workshop on how you actually promote your work would be good. I would go to it myself. How do you, once you've had your book published, how do you yourself promote it? While still keeping some shred of dignity. I think it's...
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I know I've gotten a lot out of it. So please, join me in thanking Dr. John Rennie Short. And we'll make this recording available. And I don't know if there's any last comments or questions, but I'm recognizing we're at the 1 o'clock hour. So I want to respect everyone's time and just to thank you once more for being willing to do this.
No, my pleasure, and thank you to Eric and Amy for organizing and promoting this. Gave me an opportunity to still keep in contact with UMBC, though I'm retired, but I'm officially emeritus. And someone said to me, "What does emeritus mean?" I said, "I think it's Latin. It just means boring old fart, I think." No, but I'm still technically technically associated with UMBC, and it was nice to do this. And thank you for organizing it, and thank you for the people who turned up. And if anyone has a more specific question, feel free to email me at jrs@umbc.edu.
Great, thank you. And hopefully we will see some of you next week at the publication celebration event where we'll have on display at least a few of your books, John. So, I'm sorry to miss it. It's actually, I used to enjoy those things. I also used to enjoy the new faculty 10-minute talks. I used to love going to those because it was like, you get 4 talks and it would range from Asian history to, psychodynamics of queer identity. I loved it. Those are the things that were great. And I think those things that bring those of us in the social sciences together is really, really cool. So thank you, you and Amy, for doing that. Yeah, very glad to. All right.
So take care, everyone.
Everyone has a great week.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Amy and Eric.
Thank you.